the surgeon, the nurse, and a third chair reserved for you. Welcome to the third chair.
Hello and welcome back to the Third Chair podcast show again. Thank you for joining us. And as always, this podcast is for entertainment and educational purposes only. We're sharing our ideas, experiences, psychology, and faith. We're not giving any personal, medical, legal, professional advice. And our goal is just to hopefully make you smile and think a little bit differently about these topics. And if you enjoy it, please subscribe and join us for the next episode. And pull up a chair. And always remember, there's always room for one more in the third chair. Today, we are lucky to have my cousin, who's a medical student in Egypt, join us again. After our last episode, we had a lot of positive feedback, and her and I sat down and we started talking, and we decided we wanted to kind of go a little further on the last topic and talk a little bit more about why we can't let go. And we're going to kind of try to understand the cycles and hopefully try to come with some form of conclusion together. So welcome back to our show, cousin. How are you today?
Hey, I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you for asking. I'm kind of excited to do this show today. I'm a little anxious because it's actually a really complicated topic. So it's going to be very interesting to see your experiences. Hopefully, I can share some experiences. And also, I should make a side note. My sister will hopefully be available for the next one. She should be done with her big project, her big book project. So we'll be very excited to have her back on episode 5. I'm very excited to have her back.
Thank you so much. I'm excited too.
So tell me, as we were thinking about this, I was thinking, have you ever replayed some kind of conversation you had with somebody, let's say last month, last week, 10 years ago, and you still feel that cringe feeling where you're like, and you just keep replaying that? Or tell me about your experience. Tell me your thoughts on that.
Well, actually, let me break that down into like few things. I believe that this has definitely happened with me. But like, let's talk about which stage. Like, you were a child, a teenager. In my case, I'm 24, so in my early 20s, which stage? Because each stage has a different psychology and different developmental thoughts, like how you think and how you react to the environment and how you think, like, are you thinking about this, like, situation 10 years ago or 5 years ago or 4 years ago? Which stage were you in? And what action did you actually want to, like, do instead of their actions that you actually have?
Yeah, so from my
So
perspective, I was thinking more of adulthood, and I guess you could lean back to your experiences as a child. You can, as you're in your adolescent years or in your late teenage years. I'm okay with that as well. I was just more trying to understand, why do you think the brain keeps replaying these painful memories? And I guess let's look at it from an adulthood perspective.
yeah, well, let me think. Well, actually, the I feel like the trauma, if this situation is traumatic, for example, and you didn't get like best reaction, and the brain keeps playing like the scene over and over again. I feel like, from my own personal experience, the trauma first goes into a dormant stage where the adult cannot really remember it or recall it because we're busy with life and goals, and you're still not processing it yet. But when you reach like a safe zone where you have actually achieved your goals and everything is set, the trauma, the brain plays back the trauma. And that's the part where you think, like you said, why did I react this way? Why?
Hmm.
And was it from like a loved one who you really trust? So you froze, you could not react? Or was it from a stranger? Or was it from just a friend? You know? Or at least you think it's a friend, because normal friends are not supposed to cause painful memories, and loved ones as well. We all make mistakes, don't get me the wrong way. But are we talking about repetitive painful memories from the same person or the same friend or the same loved one? So it makes me feel like that's part of us. It makes us freeze and not react properly. Therefore, we want to react different. and the brain keeps like playing this things in our heads. That's my point of view.
Yeah, it's interesting because you bring up something that early psychologists looked at a lot. You know, they always wondered, why is the brain torturing us, right? I thought the brain was supposed to protect us and be there for us. And it's really interesting because you can look at it from multiple different perspectives, right? You can look at it from an evolutionary perspective. You can look at it from like a survival mode. If something bad happens, the brain doesn't want you to forget it because it doesn't want you to go through that same bad experience again. And that's how the brain learns from mistakes and hopefully avoid future dangers. So it's really interesting because the brain can't differentiate between a tiger that's in the bush that's trying to attack you from, mom or dad yelling at us for something that we did wrong. To the brain, that quote unquote traumatic experience is interpreted the same. It's just an experience that happened. On a higher level of thinking, we understand that one is not as dangerous as the other. But on a psychological and a biological level, the brain doesn't differentiate between the two. So it's really interesting to make that connection that, why is it that this thing that you expect to be from some protective, whether it's a friend, loved one, family member, whoever, how can this be causing me all the stress? And I think the explanation, at least psychologically, is because the brain can't differentiate between the two. And I think that's really important for us as we mature and as we grow to teach ourselves to hone in that, hey, this is just my biological response. How can I work with this and make it work for me in a way where, yes, I can avoid future dangers, I can learn from my mistakes, but without letting it become something that, bothers us and keeps going, which brings up a question of, why do embarrassing moments stay with us? Like, do you have an embarrassing moment that you remember that happened last year that has nothing to do with what's happening today, and you still remember it and it still plays in your head? But during that whole year, you might have gotten dozens or hundreds of compliments from people, and you forget those, right? It's easy to forget those. But why is it that you remember that one bad thing that happened, whether it's an insult or embarrassing moment or whatever?
Well, actually, I've got like 2 points to talk about. Like, let me break that down too. First of all, like when you remember the bad memory over and over again and it keeps getting on your nerves, ruining your present day, that's like a normal trauma response that the brain does. But that's also part of the healing process. When I was late in high school, I used to write like a quote and always remember, we do not run away from the past, but we face it, accept it, and after a while, we let it go. That's a part where you actually heal. That's the hard part. Because some people never face their traumas. And they're kept inside, moving them and making them respond in certain ways, and they never get in touch with their traumas. On the other hand, when you face your traumas and realize it, and even if you pass through the hard stage, which you're talking about, where it keeps replaying in your head over and over again, ruining the present moment, but that's not forever. That's part of the healing process. That's when we actually have to face it. Let me give you an example. For example, if a child is being bullied, and I think I have mentioned that before, in a classroom, and the trauma was bad because they were so young, like second or third grade, and could not react to the teacher or to the police,
Mm-hmm.
And then the person kept replaying this trauma over and over in his head, and not involuntarily. And then the part where the trauma heals is when, from my own personal perspective, he can imagine himself in his present moment, like in his actual present moment, in his present age, getting into this classroom, telling the child few things, which are, this is not your fault, you're not defined by what they say, and you're stronger than you think, and you're gonna be okay. And he holds his child self, version of himself, and gets out of this classroom. This is where the trauma actually heals. This is when the person can differentiate between the past and the present. The part that hurts in the part that he is okay now. And he's no longer bullied by anyone. And he realizes that he's not defined by what they say, you know? And
I mean,
let me
that's
get
beautiful
into
because
another
that's you're basically describing
point, you.
working them through that cognitive behavioral therapy, right? That's basically what you're describing. The example that I remember in psychology learning is okay, you get somebody that says, I did public speaking. I failed in public speaking, so I was betrayed. Now I don't trust people. Now public speaking feels dangerous because I got rejected. So now what do? I
Exactly.
avoid public speaking, and because of that, now I avoid relationships. So that process is called in psychiatry is called generalization. And sometimes
Yeah.
it can be protective, right? If something was really, really bad. But the problem is, it can become excessive, like what you just described, when you get that child or adult where they now avoid what could be a good situation for them. Um, and the idea is, how do we teach them to realize, hey, this is just what you're doing is called generalization, and you don't apply that to every situation. Otherwise, you get anxiety, right? And that's where anxiety can grow from. It can grow from that
Yes,
generalization
exactly.
concept. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just didn't want to
No,
lose
it's
that. I
okay.
had that thought, and I just had to put it out there.
No, no, that's okay. Actually, I wanted to add that you were saying, why do we not remember the hundreds of compliments and we remember that one like situation when we got criticized or bullied or whatever? Actually, I have got a point of view, which don't get me the wrong way. I'm not being hard on parents, but I do have a point of view. Um, like let's imagine like a child who's being brought in a home where parents are taking care of their emotional needs and giving them positive affirmation of that they're good, they're doing great, there's nothing wrong with them, they're not like being mistreated in any way. And a teacher, for example, mistreats them at school, there would be a red spot, like an alarm that the child would feel that something wrong has happened. But on the other hand, they're being mistreated at home or or mistreated in any way, and they're being told the same thing that they're being told at school. They would believe it. They wouldn't buy the compliment. They would the sound of that of these stuff that has been said to them home and in school will be inside them, and it would be very hard for them to accept compliments, which are not compliments, are the reflection of their true self, you know. And I feel like this is strongly like linked to how they were raised, and this is where like what you say anxiety comes from. That they hate interacting with people, that they don't feel safe in a social like gathering, that they don't accept compliments easily. It's very, very, very important. People bring children to the world and they go scared from the comments they might suffer from outside home in an environment where parents can't control, but do not realize how strong parenting is and how a strong family is so strong, definitely strong, that it can actually protect the child from believing any external trauma rather than, don't get me the wrong way, it doesn't completely protect 100% from the trauma, but it does remove the burden, you know? That's my point of view.
Yeah, no, you make a very good point. And so I'm trying to look at it, I guess, from a biological and a medical perspective. What is the brain trying to
Yeah.
do? So when the brain is repeating these experiences, right, these bad experiences that you just described, that repetitive thought, or it's called rumination, right, when you keep thinking about something just one more time, maybe I'll figure it out. Why did this happen to me? Why did this occur? That's a natural response because the brain is designed to try to find a solution, right? Because when something bad happens, it wants to find the solution of how to avoid that from occurring. And unfortunately, that develops something in the brain called a default mode network. Okay, this is what happens during the day when we are thinking about things, or when you're daydreaming, right? Matabi sarhana, where you're sitting there thinking about something.
Yeah.
That default mode network is trying to analyze and reflect on all these things, and you get the prefrontal cortex, the hippocampus is activated, and this is why. And the hippocampus is important with memory system, right? So what happens is as it's activated, unfortunately, it keeps that rumination. It almost like it's a bad cycle. It keeps happening over and over and over into it. And this is why all of a sudden you get these bad anxieties because it's the same parts of the brain that are always being activated in these situations. It's usually the either it's the hippocampus or it's the hypothalamus or maybe the prefrontal cortex and then the amygdala, right? When you get that, what we talked about last week, that flight or flight response. And the problem is we have to be careful because if we don't find a way to control it, that's when you start to get pathological behavior. That's when people start to get into, obsessive compulsive behavior or major depressive disorder. So I think it's important to, especially when people do these cognitive behavioral therapies, we try to teach our patients that, hey, look, these were the things that helped our ancestors survive things like predators, that tiger that was hiding in the bush. And that can be helpful, right, in some situations. But what we need to realize is now your brain has a higher level of understanding. So, like you said, understanding why this is happening doesn't make the bad experiences go away because the bad experiences are going to happen. This is part of life. But the idea is we're trying to find a way to respond to these by having that higher awareness. That's all it is, so that you don't always react to them. So it's okay to know that, hey, I don't always have to react to these bad situations or these bad things that happen. And this is where you start to hopefully develop like an adaptation, how to be more moderate in your response.
So like an immune system?
I'm sorry?
Like an immune response or an immune system?
Yeah, I guess that's another way to look at it. Yeah, it's almost like an immune system, right? I mean, in a way, it's like your psychological immune system. It's trying to protect you from these bad events, but the good news is you have control over it, right? Because we have that higher level of thought process, where like when you're awake, you and I are able to understand what we're doing. So by understanding what your body is doing, hopefully you can control and realize that, hey, these are just normal physiological responses, what I'm experiencing. And this is how you train people to hopefully be in control of these bad feelings and in control of these episodes of rumination and repetitive thoughts that keep happening over and over.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you described it very usefully from a scientific perspective. I definitely believe that the repetitiveness of these like situations in one's mind definitely has got its phase and it actually goes away. It doesn't stay forever. It just takes its cycle. And that's when healing happens. That's when the person is not triggered by them as much as he used to, Especially if this like situation, like if this person is still in his life and a lot of traumas has happened because that person can actually outgrow these voices and understand that there is nothing wrong with him. There's actually something wrong on the other side. And this is when that person can start putting boundaries and understanding that this wrong self-image that has been implemented into his head as a child or as a teenager can now go away into his adulthood,
Yeah, absolutely. Because look, that's the difference between reflection and rumination. So rumination, when you have a problem, you ask yourself, why am I like this? But when you have reflection, it's the opposite. You ask, what can I learn from this? And that's that's what we need to do for ourselves, for your patients when you see them and you sit with them. And when people start to push away from why am I like this to what can I learn from this, I think from a mental health standpoint, you become healthier and you start to get control of that situation.
Definitely. And that's when you outgrow the trauma and becomes a person you want to be, not a reflection of what you have been through,
Yeah, absolutely. And something that I think you briefly broached and discussed is, you know, regret and sadness feels very real, right? This is not something that's just, to the person, it's not subjective. I mean, it to them, it's an objective feeling that they are really experiencing.
Yeah. Well, I feel like that sadness and regret can be a very normal response to the hard situation that this person has been through, because they would feel like, oh my god, why did this happen to me? Why didn't I respond better? Why couldn't I outgrow the situation? Why am I so hurt? Why and why and why? And a lot of what ifs, you know?
Yeah, what
But
if I would
I
have
feel
done
like
this?
that's
What
a,
if I would have done that? Hmm.
exactly. But I feel like that's the part where you can actually feel like feel what you feel. Sometimes we need to feel the negative so that it can, like body ventilates all of the negative thoughts so that you can actually outgrow them and say, this was not my fault. I reacted normally because these people were too close to me that I believed them over myself. Or no, I believe them because I had my reasons that no one ever told me I was good enough, so therefore I felt like I was not good enough and what they were saying was true, for example. So I feel like sadness and regret is a very normal response, especially when the trauma is hard, you know? But then the person starts outgrowing them and saying, that will never happen again. I will never let someone define me and believe it. And if I responded that way as a teenager, or as a child, I will not respond to it as an adult. And that's when you outgrow the trauma and you can build a beautiful present and have a wonderful future that you don't know of because no one knows the future, but you can actually think what's gonna happen in the future if I'm like that in the present, if I outgrew the trauma, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, um, you know, avoiding, and we talked, I think, about this on episode two, avoiding that
Yeah,
victim card, because that
exactly.
unfortunately, if you fall into that, it just spirals down and it never gets better. And this is something that's uniquely special about human beings. You know, on this planet, there's so many creatures, but what makes us, one of the things that makes us different is we are able to mentally simulate alternative realities, right? That's why we say, what if I would have done this? Because in your head, you develop a
Exactly.
whole new scenario, right? A whole new reality. And that can be
Yes.
helpful if it's helping you plan, right? Because if you're thinking ahead, well, what if I do this? What if I do this? What if I do this? And then you come up with what you think is the best plan of action. But the problem is you can't let that trap you either. Because if you just keep asking those what if scenarios and you leave it unchecked, then you never improve, you can never move forward, right? You become paralyzed almost.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you're very right. I feel like it's okay to say what if, but it's not okay to say like you said crap in it. Because the past won't change. You can't change the past. You can only be defined by who you choose to be. You know?
Hmm.
This is the most important thing that everyone needs to understand. You can't change the past, you can't change what happened, you can't change how did it go, but you can only choose what do you want to do forward from this point, you know? What do you want to do now? Who do you want to be? We can only choose who do we want to be and what do we want to do with our own hands and our own deeds. And that's when you choose to leave your mark in the world. You'll not be a teacher who's a bully. You'll not be a colleague who's a bully. You'll not be a relative who's a bully. And you'll never be a parent who is a bully, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, you reminded me of a man I met many years ago. I think I met him like 25 years ago or 30 years ago. And
Yeah.
at a coffee shop. We were just sitting there. And I remember I saw him there a lot. And this guy was always so happy. He always smiled all the time. And one day I just got the courage and I asked him, I was like, hey, why are you always, like, I was like, hey, my name is this. And we
Smile.
started talking. Why are you always, I've noticed you're always smiling. You're always happy. And he looked at me. He's like, sit down for a second. So he made me sit next to him. He's like, and he pointed to the person that was ordering the cup of coffee. And he's like, you see that person right there? I don't know their name. I don't know who they are. But all I could tell you is that in this moment, this is the only time they will be exactly like this. This moment can never be recreated again. It's impossible. Whether it's good or it's bad, it can never be recreated. When I see a picture of my loved ones, my son, my daughter, whoever, my cousin, my uncle, what that moment in time will never be happen again. You only get to experience it once. And he made the conscious decision many years ago that I'm going to enjoy every single one of these moments, good or bad, because it's never going to happen again. I might as well get the most out of it.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how that gratitude, right, which you and I talked about on our last talk, is so
Yeah.
powerful. That little gratitude, and over time, can be very powerful and influential on you. It's hard, right? Because our brain, as we've been discussing, has a negative bias. It because it's a survival
Yeah.
mode, right? So
Yeah.
we have to overcome that, and having that, what you were describing, that gratitude, and making that intentional effort, pushing forward into it, is what's actually going to make a change in the long term, right? And so you reminded me of
Definitely.
that story. So I guess, are you? I mean, I know I'm a believer of it, but I want to hear your point of view. Can the brain change over time?
Definitely, but it needs a lot of trust because it has been wired in a certain way growing up in whatever environments, as different people have different growing environments. But when a person grows old and he chooses to like rewire the brain, it can definitely change. It definitely takes time, effort, like fighting anxiety, sometimes depression, but it can definitely change. Definitely. And people who find the repetitive thoughts, um, like um, chronic, I think they should go for cognitive behavioral therapy and where they can actually talk in a safe environment and be understood and be trained to rewire the brain. And sometimes when you talk the trauma out, it takes a lot of burden, then you keep it inside, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. People, I think even today with modern science, we we don't explain and we don't really teach the importance of neuroplasticity. New neural
Yeah.
pathways can be laid, and these are done through repetition, right? Habits, therapy, mindfulness, sleeping well, exercise. All these things are really
Definitely.
important, you know. And as you know, I'm a very faithful man, and to me, like, I remember growing up as a kid, always hearing, Ramadan is so important. Ramadan is so important. And, if you do this for a whole month, it's like your sins, like if you fasted that whole month and you did everything you're supposed to do, it's like your sins from the whole previous year were erased. And,
Yeah.
I always wondered, why is Ramadan 30 days? Why isn't it 10 days? Why isn't it 15 days? Why isn't it 20 days? It averages about 20 days. And when I started to look into it a little bit more, what I noticed is that for behaviors to stick, usually you need at least about 3.5 to 4 weeks of time, which is right around that
Well,
30-day period. So when you want somebody to exercise consistently and to lose weight and to make it a habit, you have to get them to commit that 3 days a week or daily and do it. And it's weird because after that month, people will almost feel weird about not doing it. So it's the same thing like in Ramadan. Like if you force yourself to fast and you force yourself to pray and you pray on time, after that month, you almost feel guilty and weird if you don't do it. And the biological perspective is because you literally developed new neural pathways. You literally
wow.
rewired your brain. And and this is why it's something that's, really important. And just to kind of go into faith a little bit, this is why when I talk to people and they feel like, oh, this can never get better, and it's like, you know what, just you need to take a deep breath and remember, whether you look at it from a biological perspective or from a religious perspective, you know, don't despair in the mercy of Allah, right? لا
Yeah.
تقنطوا من رحمة الله. Right?
Definitely.
This is really important. And also remember things like making dhikr is really important. And in dhikr of Rabbana is not just, saying La ilaha illallah, walhamdulillah, and things like that. It's a lot of
Yeah.
things. It's even smiling at your neighbor, being nice to people. These are all qualities of God. And if you embody these qualities, it's amazing that this can literally rewire your brain and make you a better person. ألا بذكر
Yeah.
الله تطمئن القلوب. Indeed, with the remembrance
Yeah.
of God do hearts rest, and remembrance of Allah do hearts find rest. These are really important. And I find, and this is something that helps me when I get into really bad, like I can remember 3 times in my life that I went through really difficult phases. And even with this scientific knowledge and even understanding it, it's easy to fall into this bad cycle and thinking negative, because just like you can rewire your brain for the positive, you can rewire your brain for the negative. And one thing I try to remember, one of my favorite ayahs says, فَإِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا إِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا, right? Indeed,
Yeah.
with hardship comes ease, and it's repeated again. Indeed, with hardships comes ease, and it's that understanding, and I think in that if you can if you can appreciate that and build that into your life, I really think it'll make a huge difference. But aside from the faith perspective, you know, let's talk about some practical tips. What are some things that you've done that you think help, or you think that make this experience or this transition hopefully easier for you or people you've been around?
Well, I wanna. That's a tough question, but I'm gonna tell you what, like, my perspective. Uh, I feel like healing happens by God. Not we don't cause the healing; He causes the healing. And I feel like you're connected to God, right? And you feel the pain. You say it up, and you go through it. You go through it, and one day it just stops. When you're patient and you choose not to be a reflection of what you have been through, like, don't get me the wrong way, not just a reflection, like a projection, like for example, if someone has been hurt, they choose to hurt. But when you choose that you endure the pain and be as much as good as you can be to people around you, but you're human. You can fall into traps. You can lose it one day with your parents, for example, because you're going through a tough time of replaying the trauma over and over again. But when you try your best, one day it just stops. And that happens by God. He tests your patience. And one day it no longer hurts. One day it no longer replays in your mind over and over again. One day it means absolutely nothing than just a bad memory. That when you remember it fading away, That's my experience.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. It's hard, right? And it's easy to say things, um, and it's another thing to have lived it, right? And I can tell you
Yeah.
from my personal experience, having lived it, these things aren't easy. They take time. They don't just take days or weeks. Sometimes they take months. Sometimes they take years. But that
Exactly.
patience is very important, and that repetition. Remember, I gave you the example in our last episode with patience. Like when I would go around in the hospital, the first thing I
And
would
you
say
say what
is,
a beautiful
yeah,
day.
what a beautiful day it is today. And you almost push that positivity onto people. And I
Yeah.
saw the difference. I'm telling you, especially patients that were in the hospital for a long time. Like I would have patients that had horrible traumas where I did brain, spine surgery, I did a bunch of things on them. And you just
Yeah.
keep, and then over time, it seeps through. It really does. And these are
Yeah.
things that can, if you can do yourself. And there's also a lot of different things, right? We're not just talking about people that are very ill in the hospital. There's a lot of simple activities you can do, like exercise, and it doesn't have to be a lot, right? It can be
Yeah.
just a little, sleep, socializing, talking to people. A new thing I've
Yeah.
noticed that a lot of people do, and it's adults, not kids, that do this, is coloring. They'll buy coloring books and literally color. Sit there and they'll buy markers and pencils, and they color all these fancy
Mhm.
shapes, and from the outside you think that, hey, what's the point of this? But it's wild. People enjoy it, and there's evidence
Yeah.
that people feel happier after they do these things.
Yeah, it's definitely therapeutic. I do a stitchery kit.
Oh, that's awesome. How did you get into that?
My dad one day brought me a stitchery kit for kids when I was like in second grade, and then we started buying them over and over, and I kept doing them, copying the drawing and doing the stitches,
So you mean
and
like
then
literally
I
like
stopped.
stitching, like old school, like where you
Yeah,
like flowers and things like that, you like use.
yeah, exactly.
Oh
Yeah,
wow.
flowers, and rainbows, and rabbits, and birds, and the one I'm doing right now is flowers. And then I stopped, going to med school, and before that, preparing for my grades. But I felt like I wanted to go to an old habit that made me feel really, really, really relaxed. So I started doing it in the kitchen. My dad got me all the things that I need and all the beautiful colors and everything, and I started doing them, and I felt very, very, very relaxed. I can do it for like hours.
That's awesome. I mean, and that's what you're looking for. You need something to almost like put the brake on the brain, right? Because your brain is always in that
Exactly.
fight and flight response. So you need something that activates that vagus nerve. You need to rest and digest.
Exactly.
You got to put that brake so that you can force your body to recoup, and it's amazing. It's almost like restarting a computer. If you leave a computer on for 3 days, it breaks down. You need to give
Exactly.
it breaks. And whether it's coloring, whether it's stitching, like you just said, crochet, whatever it is you like to do, socializing, meditation, maybe just taking that time. For me, sometimes it's just, that salah or making dhikr or calling family or helping people. Or the other big one
Yeah.
is gratitude. Man, I cannot tell you how important gratitude is. And especially not just for things that are out of your control, but things that are in your control. So you could be
Yeah.
happy that, oh, I have this new car or I have this. Yeah, that's great. But I'm talking about simpler things, like, hey, I called this person and I said hello to them, or hey, I got up today and I felt a little less pain, or I was able to walk from here to there, or I did I before I left the house, I made my bed and I made it look pretty and I put my pillows in the right spot. Like something as simple as that. It's amazing over time how that can really reshape your brain, and it allows you to take advantage of that neuroplasticity. You can hijack it and hopefully get better.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Yeah. I completely agree with you.
You know, um, so in closing, I challenge myself, right? And I challenge you, and I challenge anybody that's listening. Just imagine that your house was, I mean, your mind was like a house. What room do you want to spend the most time in today, or tomorrow, or the next day? And try to figure out what is that happy space, and try to make the most of that, and show as much gratitude. And and it's wild
Yeah.
because, and remember that healing, like you said, doesn't mean that we change the past or we forget the past. It actually means that we're hopefully remembering things differently, and we're remembering, what can I learn from this? Not why this happened to me, but what can I learn from this?
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you for joining us. I really love talking to you. I can't wait to our next episode. Hopefully, next one will be me, you, and my sister, and we can have a little bit of a tete-a-tete, as they say, and see what we can come up with.
Well, I'm really excited for it.
Thank you for
And I'm so happy you got me here.
thank you for joining us.